The clatter of silverware against china sounded like a distant avalanche to everyone else in the bustling bistro, but to Lily, the world was a vacuum of silence, defined only by the vibrations of the floor and the cruel, twisted expression on the man's face across from her. She had spent 2 hours curling her hair, picking out a dress that was the exact shade of forget-me, not blue, and rehearsing how she would explain her deafness to a stranger without scaring him away. But she hadn't even gotten the chance to speak. Mark, a man she had met on a dating app who seemed so charming in his texts, had taken one look at her signing hello to the waiter, realized she was deaf, and immediately recoiled as if she were contagious. He didn't just reject her, he annihilated her dignity in the center of a crowded room, standing up and throwing his napkin on the table with a look of pure disgust. I signed up for a date, not a charity case, he had said, his lips moving slow enough for her to read every devastating syllable, ensuring she understood exactly how unwanted she was. If you believe that everyone deserves love and that kindness can change a life in a single moment, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story. Let's spread a little more hope in the world today. Lily sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. She could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her burning, pitying, curious stares that felt like needles against her skin. She wanted to run, to vanish into the floorboards, but her legs refused to move. She was 26 years old, successful in her graphic design career, kind-hearted and loving, but in that moment, she was just the broken girl who had ruined a man's evening simply by existing. Mark was still standing there, buttoning his jacket with an air of arrogant finality, looking around the room as if seeking validation for his rudeness. He looked at her one last time and sneered, mouthing the words, "You should have told me. It's false advertising." The cruelty was so sharp, it brought tears instantly to her eyes, blurring the warm lights of the restaurant into fractured stars. Across the room, in a cozy booth near the window, Caleb had been watching the scene unfold with a growing fire in his gut. He was a single father, a carpenter with rough hands and a heart that had been bruised by life but never hardened. Sitting across from him was his 7-year-old daughter Sophie, who was happily coloring on a placemat. Sophie was the light of his life, his entire world, and Sophie was also profoundly deaf. Caleb had spent the last 7 years immersing himself in the deaf community, learning American Sign Language until his hand moved as fluidly as his voice, and fighting every day to ensure his daughter never felt less than in a hearing world. When he saw the man across the room stand up and treat the woman in the blue dress like garbage, he didn't just see a stranger being rude. He saw a terrifying vision of his own daughter's future. He saw Sophie sitting there in 20 years crying because some small-minded man couldn't see her worth. Caleb looked at Sophie, who hadn't noticed the commotion, and then back at the woman. Lily was staring at the table, a single tear tracking through her makeup. Mark was turning to leave, acting as though he had just dodged a bullet. Something in Caleb snapped. It wasn't a violent snap, but a protective one, a fierce, paternal, masculine urge to correct a cosmic wrong. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wood floor, drawing even more attention. He didn't walk. He strode across the restaurant, his boots heavy and purposeful. The restaurant fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. People sensed a confrontation. Mark, hearing the approach, turned around, expecting the waiter, but instead found himself chest to chest with a man who was 3 inches taller and looking at him with eyes like cold steel. "Is there a problem here?" Mark asked, his voice dripping with defensive arrogance. Caleb ignored him completely. He didn't give the man the satisfaction of a verbal debate. Instead, Caleb turned his back on Mark, putting himself between the bully and the victim. He looked down at Lily. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, expecting another lecture or perhaps a pitying comment from a stranger. But Caleb didn't speak with his mouth. He raised his hands. His movements were strong, precise, and incredibly gentle. "He is a fool," Caleb sighed, his facial expression softening into something warm and reassuring. "He does not see you, but I see you." Lily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. It wasn't just that he knew sign language. It was the dialect, the fluency, the emotion behind it. It was the language of her heart. Mark, confused and irritated by being ignored, tried to step around Caleb. "Hey, buddy, I'm talking to you." "She's deaf. She can't hear you either." Caleb spun around, his patience evaporated. "I know she is," he said aloud, his voice booming through the silent bistro, deep and resonant. And that makes her more unique and observant than you will ever be. You think silence is a deficit? It's a gift you clearly lack the depth to understand. Mark turned red, stammering, looking for an exit as the patrons began to murmur in agreement with Caleb. But Caleb wasn't done. He turned back to Lily, and he did something that made the entire room gasp. He didn't want to just comfort her. He wanted to erase the memory of Mark's rejection with something so overwhelming, so positive, that it would be the only thing she remembered from this night. He wanted to show this jerk what he was throwing away. Caleb dropped to one knee. It was theatrical, yes, but it was necessary. The room went completely still. Lily's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Caleb looked her dead in the eyes, his gaze intense and sincere, and he raised his hands again. "You are beautiful," he signed. "You are worthy of a love that is loud and proud." And then, with a playful but deeply serious glint in his eye, looking sideways at Mark to ensure he was watching, Caleb signed the words that would change everything, "Marry me." He didn't say it aloud. He signed it, 2 fingers clasping, then pointing to his chest. It was a challenge to the universe, a statement that she was wife material, that she was a prize, that a man should be begging for her hand, not walking away from it. Lily burst into tears, not of sadness this time, but of overwhelming shock and relief. A laugh bubbled up from her throat, a sound she had been suppressing. She knew he wasn't literally proposing marriage to a stranger, but the gesture was so grand, so protective, and so incredibly validating that it healed the crack in her heart instantly. Mark, thoroughly humiliated and realizing he was now the villain in a room full of people glaring at him, turned on his heel and scurried out the door, the bell jingling mockingly behind him. The restaurant erupted. It started with a slow clap from an older couple in the corner and swelled into a roar of applause. But Lily didn't hear the applause. She only saw Caleb's kind eyes and his smile. He stood up, brushing off his knee, his face flushing slightly as the adrenaline faded. "I'm sorry," he signed, smiling sheepishly. "I tend to be dramatic when I'm angry. I'm Caleb." Lily wiped her tears, her hands trembling as she signed back. "I'm Lily. And you are crazy. But thank you. You have no idea what that meant." Caleb gestured toward his booth. "I have a little girl over there. Her name is Sophie. She's 7, and she's deaf, like you. I couldn't sit there and watch him make you feel like you didn't belong. Would you like to join us for dessert? Sophie would love to meet you." Lily looked over at the little girl, who was now watching them with wide, curious eyes. Sophie waved a small, shy hand. Lily's heart melted. She looked back at Caleb, this stranger who had just staged a proposal to save her honor, and nodded. "I would love that," she signed. They walked back to the booth together, not as a couple, but as 2 souls who understood the weight of silence and the power of connection. When they sat down, Sophie immediately abandoned her coloring book. Her eyes lit up when she realized Lily could sign. "You talk like me." Sophie signed enthusiastically, her small fingers moving rapidly. "Daddy talks like us too, but he is slow." Lily laughed, a genuine, full-bodied sound that made Caleb smile. "Your daddy is a hero," Lily signed back to the little girl. The dinner that followed was magical. It wasn't a date in the traditional sense, but it was the most intimate eating Lily had ever experienced. They didn't have to shout over the noise of the restaurant. They created a quiet bubble of conversation, their hands weaving stories of their lives. Caleb told her about raising Sophie alone after his wife passed away, about the struggles of learning ASL late at night from YouTube videos, and about his fear that he would never be enough for his daughter. Lily told him about growing up deaf, the isolation of high school, her art, and her difficulty finding a partner who saw her as a person first and a disability second. For the first time in years, Lily didn't feel like she had to translate herself. She didn't have to apologize for who she was. She was simply understood. As the night wound down and the staff began to stack chairs, Caleb walked Lily to her car. The air outside was crisp, and the streetlights hummed with amber light. "You know," Caleb said, signing as he spoke, "I might have been acting back there to scare that guy off, but I meant what I said about you being worthy." He paused, looking nervous for the first time that night. "I'm not looking for a wife tonight, Lily, but I am looking for a friend. And maybe, if you're open to it, a real date. One where the guy doesn't leave." Lily looked at him, the broad shoulders that had shielded her, the gentle hands that spoke her language. She thought about the "marry me" sign he had thrown up in the heat of the moment. It was crazy, impulsive, and perfect. "I would like that," she signed. "But you have set the bar very high. How do you top a proposal on the first meeting?" Caleb laughed, a deep, warm sound. "I guess I'll just have to spend the rest of my life trying to impress you." It was a joke, but it felt like a prophecy. They exchanged numbers, and as Lily drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror to see Caleb standing there, watching her go, guarding her until she was safe. The silence in her car didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt full of possibility. Months turned into a year. The fake proposal became a legendary story among their friends and family. Caleb and Lily were inseparable. Sophie adored Lily, finally having a maternal figure who understood her world implicitly. They became a trio, a family unit bound not just by love, but by a shared language and a shared resilience. Caleb showed Lily that a man could be strong without being cruel, and Lily showed Caleb that his heart was big enough to love again after the loss of his wife. They navigated the challenges of life together. Parent-teacher conferences for Sophie where the interpreter didn't show up, the stares of people in public, the beauty of silent mornings with coffee and newspapers. But Caleb, being a man of intention, never forgot how they met. He knew that the story of their beginning deserved a proper ending. On the one-year anniversary of that night, Caleb told Lily to dress up. He drove her back to the same bistro. Lily laughed when they pulled up. "Are we going to cause another scene?" She signed playfully. "Me?" Caleb signed back with a wink. They walked in, and the manager, who remembered them, smiled and led them to the same table where Mark had broken her heart and Caleb had healed it. But this time, the table was set for three. Sophie was there, dressed in a little blue dress that matched Lily's. They ate dinner, reminiscing about the year. The laughter was easy, the love palpable. As dessert arrived, the mood shifted. Sophie stood up on her chair, something she wasn't usually allowed to do, and tapped Lily on the shoulder. Lily looked at Sophie, then at Caleb. Caleb stood up. The restaurant wasn't silent this time. It was filled with the low hum of happiness. But for Lily, everything focused on Caleb. 1 year ago, Caleb signed, his hands trembling slightly. "I stood here and asked you a question to save you from a bad man. I signed, 'Marry me,' because I wanted him to see your value." He took a deep breath, and he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "But over the last year, I learned that I didn't know the half of your value back then. You have healed my heart. You have loved my daughter as your own. You are the most beautiful, articulate, brilliant woman I have ever known." Caleb dropped to one knee again. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming, but this time, there was no anger, no enemy to fight. There was only love. "I don't want to pretend anymore," Caleb signed, tears shining in his eyes. "I don't want to make a scene for a stranger. I want to make a life with you." He opened the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring. "Lily, for real this time, marry me?" Sophie was bouncing on her chair, her hands moving excitedly. "Say yes, say yes." She signed. Lily looked at the man who had stood up for her when she was nothing to him, the man who had learned to love her not in spite of her deafness, but with it woven into the fabric of their lives. She looked at the ring, then at his face. The silence of her world was filled with the loudest yes her heart had ever screamed. She couldn't speak, the emotion choking her, so she nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. She pulled her hands from her face and signed, "Yes." 1,000 times, yes. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger, and the restaurant, realizing what was happening, erupted in applause once again. But this time, it wasn't a reaction to drama. It was a celebration of a promise kept. Caleb stood and pulled Lily into a kiss that felt like coming home, while Sophie wrapped her arms around their legs, completing the circle. Before we get to the final moment of their beautiful wedding, I have a special request for you. Type "love has no language" in the comments if this story touched your heart. Let's flood the comments with positivity. They were married 6 months later in a garden filled with white roses. The ceremony was spoken in English and signed in ASL. When it came time for the vows, Caleb didn't just speak them. He turned to his bride, and in front of their friends, family, and a glowing Sophie, he signed his promise to her. He promised to be her ears when she needed them, but to always listen to her voice, the one that spoke from her soul. He promised to protect her dignity, to honor her silence, and to love her until his hands could no longer move. Mark, the man from the bistro, was a distant, fading memory, a villain who had unwittingly pushed her into the arms of her hero. As they walked down the aisle together, husband and wife, Lily realized that the worst night of her life had been the necessary doorway to the best life she could imagine. She had been rejected for what she lacked, only to be chosen for exactly who she was. If this story brought a tear to your eye or a smile to your face, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We share stories of love and hope every week, and we want you to be part of our family.